I read a lot of good books in 2023. I may not have read some crazy large quantity of books, but the ones that I did end up reading were quality. I ended up enjoying every single book that I read this year, which was a big surprise. So today, I'm doing one of my favorite annual videos on the channel where I just reflect on the books that I read this year and tell you about my favorites. There won't be any spoilers in this video. Also, these aren't necessarily books that came out in 2023. They're just books that I read this year, and I'm not going to be ranking them in any way in this video. I'll save that for my top 10 books video later in the year. Now, before getting into my favorite books of 2023, I do have an honorable mention, but why don't you sit back and grab a snack, and why not make it the best high-protein breakfast cereal? That's my transition for the sponsor. Insert sponsor here. This video is sponsored by MagicSpoon. MagicSpoon is breakfast cereal reinvented. I love the childlike nostalgia of the design. It's got that Saturday cartoon vibe to it, and it has the taste that you remember as a kid, but with 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and 4 to 5 net carbs. It is high quality deliciousness. Now, I love all the flavors, but they recently sent me this chocolate chip cookie one, and this is my new favorite. You need to try it. Now, you also need to try MagicSpoon's treats. This is one of my go-to snacks. I even brought it with me on a vacation recently because they're the perfect high-protein fuel when you're on the go. Now, for the holidays, they sent me a special gift to thank me for a great year working together, and it's this really awesome silicone bowl with a cool cereal-optimized spoon. I'm gonna be eating all my cereal from this now. Thank you. Click the link below to try some MagicSpoon today. You can build your own custom box to try all the flavors that you love. And use my code CAPTUREDINWORDS to get $5 off. You can choose from the best-selling cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, maple waffle, and all the other flavors as well. And don't forget, you can also add in the magic treats, which I would highly recommend. And MagicSpoon is so confident in their product, they offer a 100% happiness guarantee. So if for some reason you don't like it, you can get a refund and get your money back, no questions asked. So start the new year right. Click the link below or scan the QR code up above and use the code CAPTUREDINWORDS to get $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/capturedinwords. They even ship to Canada and the UK. Anyways, a huge thank you to MagicSpoon for sponsoring the video. Okay, now I only have one honorable mention this time around, and it was actually the first book that I read on my e-reader when I picked this up, and that is The Shining by Stephen King. I was not able to put this thing down. Now, the reason it gets an honorable mention is because I started reading it in December of 2023, but I ended up reading the last half of it in 2024, so it doesn't exactly qualify. Not only was it the first book I finished on my e-reader, but it was the very first King book that I read, and I definitely want to read more now. And honestly, I knew next to nothing about The Shining going into it. I've never watched the movie. All I really know is the phrases "red rum" and "here's Johnny," just from pop culture references. I was very surprised at how this is much more of a slow burn, and a lot of it focuses on the effects of alcoholism and isolation, and that's not really something I expected at all. And even though it was a slow burn, I don't mean that as a bad thing. I was glued to the page, or the e-reader, and I was reading it long into the night because of that feeling of suspense that is so strong in this book. I was also surprised to find it's not really that scary of a book. It's more so psychological as the characters descend into isolation, and I mean being stuck in isolation, cut off from the outside world with an abusive person is kind of horrifying in its own right. The real horror of the book is the internal struggle itself. It's of a man that's overcome by alcohol and anger. And the brilliant atmosphere of this book is very unsettling, and that's what kept me turning the page. It wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be, but very suspenseful. The build-up around everything, how it delves deeply into the Torrance family and their life and their dynamic, and then how Jack fights the evil for a long time. It's all very satisfying, and I really enjoyed this book. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it, actually. I had the ebook for a while, and I just decided to start reading it on a whim, thinking I maybe might not even finish it, but it was really good, and I think this was a good choice for my first King book. Okay, so that's the honorable mention out of the way. Now moving on, the first book I want to mention is The Forgotten Beasts of Eld by Patricia A. McKillip. This I read back in November, I believe, and this one was very surprising for me, again, because I'm trying to make my way through, like, my backlog. Everyone's reading, like, you know, new releases. I'm sitting here reading books that I wanted to read for a long time. I have a huge backlog. Anyways, this is a book that I heard the title of it floating around for a long time. I know this is, like, a classic fantasy book, but it's one of those classics that is also not really talked about too much, and it definitely deserves to be talked about. I am so glad I just read this on a whim. It is a short standalone book, and that's why I decided to read it. I believe it's about 55,000 words, so it's not that long compared to most fantasy, and I was not expecting such beautiful, beautiful lyrical prose in this book. I feel like if you are a fan of the way that Rothfuss writes, Patrick Rothfuss, then you're going to like the Forgotten Beasts of Eld as well. Sybil is such a great three-dimensional heroine. She's one of my new favorite female protagonists. The story follows Sybil, an ivory-haired woman who lives alone on a mountain with her collection of magical, mythical creatures for her company. She keeps them with her thanks to her power to control them by using their true names. Now, fans of Ursula K. Le Guin's The Earthsea books or Patrick Rothfuss's The Kingkiller Chronicle are going to feel right at home here, and I think you guys would enjoy this book as well. She's this very icy and emotionless person, but her whole world changes when a man named Corin arrives on her mountain and brings a newborn baby to her gate. This baby, Tamlorn, is the heir to the kingdom, and there's no safe place for him to be raised in the war-torn world, and Sybil is very hesitant to take him in. But she decides it can't be too much different from raising all of her mythical beasts, so she takes him in, and she raises him on the mountainside, and she ends up loving him and accepting him as one of her own. And then this love is what opens up her emotions and pulls her to the outside world that's ravaged by war, and it's dangerous for both her and for Tamlorn. Now, I'm not going to get into anything else about the storyline, but I do just want to urge you to read this book if you haven't. It is such a refreshing standalone novel to read. I think it's a great one to read in between big fantasy books. It is such an elegant novel. Like, it doesn't feel pretentious or anything, but it just, I don't know how to describe it. It deals with ideas of memory and captivity, and it's just brilliant. Also, the story fits the length. It doesn't feel rushed. It feels like everything is where it needs to be. It has this really nice flow to the book, and there wasn't one point where I thought the pacing was off, and that's something I don't see too often, even in standalones. So yeah, if you haven't read The Forgotten Beast of Eld, I highly recommend it. Now, one of the best reading choices I made in 2023 was starting the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. I don't know what took me so long to pick these books up, because Red Rising is the first book in a long time that had me completely hooked. There's an unrelenting tempo to these books that makes them almost addictive, and it's fantastic. If you don't know, it's set in the future where mankind has spread throughout the solar system, and society is split up into a color-based class system, each color evolving physically and mentally according to the role that they play in society. The arrogant, godlike golds rule supreme, and reds occupy the lowest level and are basically the manual laborers. And the story follows Darrow, a member of the oppressed red class who's a miner on Mars, and it follows him as he fights to overturn a corrupt system from the inside out by bringing revolution. And again, the narrative is relentless. It is filled with a lot of great political intrigue and some very brutal battles. Like, I had to set the page down on multiple occasions because it was so intense. Once it gets going, this book does not let go, and I'm excited to make some Red Rising videos in 2024. Next up, we have The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams, and this again was another surprising hit, and I can't wait to read the other ones in this series because so far this is one of my new favorite books. I love the weird world building in this one, and the characters are incredible as well. The great city of Abora once glittered with gold. Now its streets are stalked by wolves. Tourmalin, the Oathless, has no taste for sitting around waiting to die while the realm of his storied ancestors falls to pieces. Talk about a guilt trip. Better to be amongst the living, where there are taverns full of women and wine. When eccentric explorer Lady Vincenza Vintage de Grazon offers him employment, he sees an easy way out. The plot and world in the Ninth Reign is very complex and neatly interwoven. This world building gets an A+ from me for originality. I loved all the creatures and the landscapes and the lore. And Vintage is a character I really love. She kind of gives off female Indiana Jones vibes, and I'm completely here for it. Now, I did have a bit of an issue with some of the other characters feeling not rounded enough. I'm wanting more depth to some of them, and I'm hoping that will be improved upon in book 2. Now, history plays a big role in this story, so it's kind of like we're following these characters, but we're also learning about what happened in the past alongside them. And Williams gradually reveals the lore in a very effective way. Now, this had a lot of great twists and turns, and it had a good setup for book 2, which I'm gonna be starting very soon. The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. This is a very emotional, traumatic story that deserves all the praise that it gets. It is... The character work in this book is brilliant. We follow Misaki, this mother who used to be this warrior, but she's now been married off into this traditional house where she has to just act like a regular housewife, but we get those flashback scenes of her being a badass, and slowly the fighter in her begins to claw itself up again as war is spreading throughout the country, and we also follow her son as well, Momoru, who is struggling when he realizes the nation that he was born to defend might be standing on a foundation of lies. Now, both of these characters I found to be so fascinating, especially Misaki. I feel like the character work was done so well, and there is some really rough parts in this book. Like, be prepared to feel a lot of emotions. You might even cry a little. Just accept it, okay? This book is very emotional. It is brilliant. There's some of the world building and the magic in here kind of reminds me of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I mean that in a good way. It focuses a lot on the elements. There's kind of a bending sort of magic here, and the way that the application of the magic during the battle scenes I think is done brilliantly. It's so cool. And also there's a lot of layers to like the politics and the propaganda that's going on. This is a high recommendation for me. I think this is a fantastic standalone book, and I definitely want to read more by M.L. Wong. Now, I was kind of hoping to read a lot of Malazan Book of the Fallen in 2023. However, I had a lot of other books I was reading, and I just didn't end up reading as many of them as I was planning to, but Gardens of the Moon was a very memorable and enjoyable read for me. I can tell that this series is going to be up there in my top favorites. It is very difficult to get into at the beginning, but eventually you will get sucked into it, and the many subplots constantly colliding results in a lot of drama and mystery that just keeps you reading and reading. You gotta keep in mind that this is epic fantasy at its peak. The scope of this gritty, dark world is massive. We follow multiple points of view, and sometimes it can get confusing just trying to remember who's who. There's a lot of terms and words that you might not understand at first, but you gotta keep in mind when you arrive as a reader, this world is living and breathing. It has histories that span millennia and vast continents. It presents us with existing power struggles between gods and immortals. There's warfare and factions and ranks and reputations, a broad array of races, and a complicated magic system with rules that aren't really that explained. But if you want to get fully invested in this epic narrative, then you need to accept that it's bigger than you. Confusion is normal. You need to just enjoy it while trying to understand. At least that's what worked for me anyway. I especially loved all the action and the drama revolving around the bridge burners. And overall, this book did live up to my expectations, and it made me get fully invested. I'm looking forward to reading many more Malazan books in 2024. The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This was a book I was not expecting to enjoy as much as I did. A friend of mine who has similar taste said they found this book way overhyped, and so I went into it with very low expectations, but then ended up binging the entire book in like a week. And Kuang has created this really incredible Asian-inspired fantasy world that mirrors the real historical events in East Asia during World War II, between China and Japan. With a splash of the Opium Wars and the Chinese Communist Revolution thrown in. And there's a lot of history here that I was unaware of that I went and did research on later, but Kwong did a really great job at blending this in. Now we're dropped into the shoes of a war orphan named Rin, who's been adopted into a horrible family. She faces discrimination at every turn, but she works hard to prove herself and to get accepted into a military training academy. Now Rin is an unlikable protagonist by far, but that is the point. She makes a lot of mistakes, and I really enjoy the direction that Kwong is bringing her in. It's not your typical protagonist, but yeah, Rin seriously needs some therapy. Now I really love how efficient Kwong's writing is. There is nothing unnecessary to the plot. It's all straight to the point, and the pacing is very quick. If you're looking for a gripping, grimdark book that doesn't shy away from showcasing the horrors of war and humanity, then you need to read The Poppy War. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is one of my new favorite novels, and I know it's not going to be for everyone. I feel like this was written specifically for me. Piranesi, although that's not his name, dwells in the house, a vast labyrinth of halls, vestibules, and statues, and an ocean with tides that occasionally flood the lower and middle floors. Now, the only other dweller of the house is the Other, a friendly but curt man who warns Piranesi that a newcomer has entered the house, threatening destruction and chaos. Now, Piranesi being an unreliable narrator, I found to be so interesting because it's not out of deceit. He's not trying to lie to us. It's because his memory is faulty, and this whole book explores the idea of memory and identity. Now, this book feels like a mix of a dream and a puzzle. It's slowly giving the reader more clues as to the nature of what's going on. And with only 7 chapters and a really great pace, this is a nice quick read that I haven't been able to stop thinking about, and I have heard that the audiobook is good as well, so I might need to give that a listen when I eventually reread this book. This is a brilliant piece of literature. I love the weird, and this mind-bending magical realism that just really pulls you into this endless labyrinth of cryptic rooms. The setting here is just so strong, and I found this book to just be so fascinating, the way that it explores themes of identity and memory. At the same time, I do understand some complaints that people have about this book being fairly slow and a little bit predictable by the end, and about it focusing on kind of the mundane stuff in Piranesi's life. But I didn't mind the mundane. I just found it so interesting. Even the mundane parts of the book, I didn't find boring. For the most part, I just couldn't put it down. So while I do recognize not everyone's going to enjoy it, I feel like a specific type of person is going to love this book, and I happen to love it. Next up, we have Shadow's Edge. This is book 2 in the Night Angel trilogy by Brent Weeks. Now, this is kind of a guilty pleasure series for me. This was the very first adult fantasy series I ever read when I was in like grade 8 or something, when I thought anything dark and edgy was cool. I loved Assassins at the time, so this was the perfect series for me. Now, I have a lot of nostalgia for it, but overall I would say it is a good yet flawed series with some serious problems. So you might wonder why I have it on this list. This is about my favorite reads of 2023. Yes, it might not be the best series out there, but after rereading it this year, or listening to it in the form of the graphic audio versions, which has a full cast and everything, I found that I still had a lot of fun with these books. And you know what? For a writer's first series, you can see the promise here. In this world, political maneuverings are made by an underground organization known as the Sakage, whose main form of muscle comes from wet boys. Yes, unfortunately, that's what they're called. They're called wet boys, and they're kind of a step above assassins. Basically, they're assassins assisted and enhanced through magical means. And we follow the young street urchin Azoth, who has to throw away his identity and his emotions in order to be apprenticed to Durzo Blint, the renowned wet boy. It's a series about surviving by doing what it takes and finding hope while facing genuine evil. It's about monsters and men, greed, faith, and destiny. Now, I gotta say, the graphic audio versions were really enjoyable. I love all the sound effects, and the cast was fantastic. And I was surprised to find that the second book is actually my favorite out of the series. I always thought I preferred the first book because it has a lot of memorable scenes and a great build-up, but book 2 has a lot of payoff. There's some really great action-heavy scenes, some very emotional moments in there as well. Even though the writing at times can be a bit sloppy, there was some powerful scenes, and the beginning and the climax are some of the best moments in the series by far. But then book 3, on the other hand, that was very underwhelming and by far the worst of the series. There's a lot of, cool things hinted at, but then it just kind of goes nowhere with it. Anyway, like I said, the series does have its problems. The main one being the treatment of female characters. Way too much sexual violence in this series. Like, I get it, this is a dark world and everything, but I didn't really like how many of the female characters were portrayed. And there's also just a lot of edgy melodrama. The writing can be kind of clumsy at times, and the world building has some really interesting lore going on, but it doesn't feel as fleshed out as it should be, which leaves it feeling kind of generic. But the action and the development of Azoth or Kylar is the main draw for me. I find him to be a pretty compelling, though kind of confusing character at times. There's moments where he's a hardened killer, and then there's other times where he's an emotional, sensitive boy. But hey, I like him, and he wasn't boring at all. Now, Brent Week's Lightbringer series is definitely a big step up in terms of the writing quality, but I still have a soft spot for the Night Angel trilogy. Okay, next up we need to talk about The Year of Sanderson. All of Sanderson's Secret Project novels, it's hard for me to choose which one is my favorite, to be honest, but Tress of the Emerald Sea, I still think I would put up as number 1. This is the Cosmere's Princess Bride story. It has this really unique fairy tale-like writing style that I think just works so well, and Hoyd narrating the story just adds so much character, and this is really just such a fun, whimsical adventure book that is really unique in the Cosmere, and I think this is a great place to start in the Cosmere as well. And just when you think it's impossible for an author to come up with another unique magic system and really fascinating world building, Sanderson surprises us yet again. Just the world of Lumar, all the different seas of spores is so cool, and the way that you can interact with the spores, it is so fascinating. And yeah, I really enjoyed Tress of the Emerald Sea. I also liked the artwork in this one a lot as well, but I think the best artwork in these secret projects probably goes to Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. This has some beautiful art that really elevated the whole thing for me. I do think I enjoyed Tress a little bit more. It's hard to say. This one, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, also gets a spot on this list though, because I like this book a lot as well. I feel like there was a little bit of awkward anime-inspired humor in this novel that I found to be a little bit cringy, even though I love anime, but the latter half of the book definitely makes up for that. Now, this also has a light romance to it as well. This is kind of Sanderson's first attempt at writing romance seriously, and I thought it was done really well. I loved seeing the inspiration from Your Name and Final Fantasy X in this book. I also just really enjoyed the world building of Painter's World, where this world covered by this dark shroud, and there's these living nightmares that roam the streets that can only be defeated by painters. And also the Heion or Heion lines, I don't know how you say it, but these like neon lines that are in the sky that provide power for everybody. I found that to just be such a really unique and interesting part of the book. And then we have The Sunlit Man. Now this one doesn't get as much love as the other two, but this is probably Sanderson's most action-packed book. There's action non-stop, and I feel like the pacing is really good in this book. It just kind of throws you into the action at the beginning, and I really enjoyed the main character in this one. I love all the Cosmere references, and I really need to make a full video on this book because I haven't done that yet. And again, this one has some really beautiful artwork inside as well. I would say the book series I had the most fun with this year was Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman. I read 3 of the Dungeon Crawler Carl books this year, and they're so good. I highly recommend listening to the audiobook versions because the narrator, he blows my mind. Like, he is so amazing at narrating. I thought there was multiple narrators, but no, it's just one guy. Basically, Earth has been taken over by aliens, and as part of an intergalactic reality show, the remaining humans are forced to make their way through levels of a dungeon, growing stronger and more powerful along the way. Now, Dungeon Crawler Carl is a really hard series to explain. It sounds like a really absurd premise for a lowbrow lit RPG, but this series is pure quality. It contains a really cohesive and deep multi-layered world around a main character who's just kind of a regular Joe trying to survive. This series is already a new favorite of mine, and if I had to pick a favorite book so far, I would probably say it's book 3, The Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook. Maybe I'm biased because it was the most recent one that I read, but I enjoyed it a lot. I love the simplicity of the whole level just being this huge train network and the crawlers being forced to travel. It's really unique, and the types of plans they were able to execute due to it was just so cool. Now, what started as humans desperately surviving a new and scary situation is starting to grow in scope and complexity, with very broad questions and powers needing to be addressed and answered, and we're slowly getting those answers, and I'm just really surprised at how the scope of everything is growing with this series. This series has some of the best landing humor that I've read. I mean, it just works so well, and I highly recommend the Sound Booth Theater audiobooks. Jeff Hayes really does an amazing job as Carl and the team, and the production is just amazing. Now, this list wouldn't be complete without mentioning at least one Discworld novel, and my favorite this year happens to be one of the most philosophical Discworld books that I've ever read, and one of the best. And I'm talking about Small Gods, published in 1992. Now again, Pratchett has pulled me in and made me fall in love with his absurd world and characters. He brilliantly is able to sum up these complex concepts while at the same time making you laugh. I don't know how the man does it, but the story is about a god that is supposed to be a big deal coming down to Earth in the form of a turtle and needing the help of the only person who can hear him, which just so happens to be a novice everyone thinks is a little bit simple, a man named Brutha who only wants to tend his melon patch. That's a very brief synopsis, but this story really makes you think about life, religion, philosophy, mythology, and at its core, Small Gods is a book that both argues for the importance of personal faith, but against people using their religious beliefs to impose fear, pain, and death on others. It very cleverly examines religious fundamentalism and blind faith and their conflict with reason and science and all that. This is such a well-written book though. I feel anyone, whether you're an atheist or religious, is going to find a lot of value here. And again, it has all that same charm and comedy that Pratchett is known for. This is one of his strongest works, and I highly recommend it, even as a starting point in Discworld. Now, when it comes to manga, I really enjoyed reading One Piece this year. I still have a bunch of videos half written for One Piece that I'm gonna be posting in 2024. I was meaning to get those up like months ago, but I am gonna be working on them again very soon because I want to continue on with One Piece. My favorite arc that I read in 2023 was probably the Arlong Park arc. I feel like this is where One Piece really starts to pick up, and it starts to have these really like hard-hitting emotional scenes and some really great fight scenes as well. The whole backstory behind Nami was very touching, and I also really enjoyed the live-action version of One Piece as well. I can't wait for season 2, but in the meantime, I am going to be reading a lot more of this manga, and I'm going to be bringing you many more One Piece videos this year. And those are my favorite books that I read in 2023. Let me know if you've read any of these books. I'll have links to them in the description if you want to check that out. They are affiliate links, so they do help out the channel. I appreciate that. Let me know your favorite books that you read in 2023, and if you have any recommendations for me to read this year, I would love to hear them. That's it for this video. If you love what I do and you want to help support the channel, the best way to do that is to join my Patreon. I would like to give a special shout out to my top tier patrons, Jacob Blair, as well as Josh from Red Fury Books, as well as my Knights Radiant tier patrons, Craig Johnson, Jess Burler, and Fantasy Files Podcast. Your guys' continued support has really been amazing, and you're awesome. Thank you so much.